Welcome to the 2-month review. This is our weekly podcast and now apparently live YouTube video cast as well, in which we talk about a single book over a 2-month period, bit by bit, enjoying it, appreciating it, doing all that stuff. This, for a 2-month period, we're going to be talking about The Physics of Sorrow by Georgi Gospodinov. And today, particularly, we're going to be talking about the first 58 pages, which is the epilogue or the epigraphy, the prologue, and part 1, which I don't think has a title. It does, The Bread of Sorrow. And joining me today, we have Tom Roberge from Riffraff and Brian Wood, who is back from wherever he was last week when we had our first little conversation and said that you were like on the lam or in witness protection or something.
Yeah, I was visiting my in-laws, so that works.
Pretty much the same thing.
Trying to keep the peace, yeah.
So I guess there's a lot of stuff that you can talk about in relation to the book, but first I just want to ask, Tom, I know that this is the book that you really like, but I don't remember, like, how did you come to read this, or what was your deal with this book?
I wish I could tell you when this is published. Let's
2015, 2014?
So was I working? So I was definitely working at Albertine. I remember that.
Oh, okay.
So I was reading, way too much just French or French translations. And you, of course, send me copies of just about everything from Open Letter. And, so partly because some of it was French, but partly just because you don't publish so much that, like, sending me one copy of everything is really a huge loss. And, of course, I'm going to read, half of it that comes my way, or at least give it to somebody who might like it. And this one was right up my alley because I'm really into mythology and Greek myths, and especially this myth, the one at the center of this, the Odyssey as well. Everything sort of, navigating around those core sort of myths that get passed down. And I'm a sucker for reinvention of those things and sort of retellings of them in modern literature as well. So picked it up, read right through it. I loved it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does. And it was 2015, so it would have been when you were still at Albertine. Yeah, the book did fairly well. It's done really well for us since it's come out. And I think you're a part of that, of one of the people that kind of helped spread the word and kept it going as over these past few years.
Wish I could say that I believed you. I find it hard to believe that my influence is all that great, but thank you nonetheless.
You're a bellwether.
A bellwether, all right. I guess it's true with your books. It's like, if your taste is way up here in esoteric, and like out there, I'm like only here. So I can I'm like the filter for the mainstream audience. Like, I'm not recommending Stephen King alongside your books, but I'm somewhere in between where I can say, oh, okay, you will actually like this. It's not so crazy that it won't make any sense to you.
We only have like one book that doesn't make any sense.
Sure. Okay.
We did a whole podcast about it. But anyways, hey, so Brian, what did you think of the first part of this?
Wait, can I ask, Brian, have you read this before?
No, just a very small section of it for a piece I was doing for a local magazine, and it was in this first 50 pages. So yeah, I'm completely new and virgin to all this.
Okay.
Which section? Because that was for the thing that you did where you interviewed me and we made up that whole interview, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we didn't make up the interview. Come on.
Someone read part of that to me once, and I was like, I had never said that.
Let's just say I tried to make it as interesting as possible. How about that?
It took a lot of work.
No, the section that I put in the magazine was where the soldier is being locked in a basement after the town's been saved, and it's kind of has like that. Speaking of Stephen King, misery feel where he's like stuck down there, and then he's in a new basement when he goes back home.
Yes. Before I forget, and I know we're sort of jumping around here. Okay, somebody's got a.
It's the dog outside my window.
Wait, that's causing a reverberate. I'm hearing everything twice.
Oh no, I think it's just because it keeps flipping to me because of the stupid dog. Just
got it. Okay. Anyway, before I forget, because I read this, whatever it was, 2-3 years ago, and hadn't really thought about it, in a linear sort of fashion, and what was in what. section and all that. So I reread the first section to sort of understand what exactly we were supposed to be talking about. So the part about the basement, I was thinking about, I don't know why, I was trying to get there. The part in the basement seems a little, I don't know what the word is. It's like this myth around World War I and World War II stories that this happened all over Europe. It feels like a story that's familiar, right?
Yeah.
Is that part of the point, or am I just calling the author a cliche?
I don't know, because I mean, I think it's one of those things that kind of crops up here and there, but I don't know that it's like so much of a cliche per se. It reminds me a little bit of that. Wasn't there a movie that came out not too long about like Goodbye Lenin or Goodbye Stalin or something to that effect? That was one of those sort of books where someone doesn't realize that like the communist era has ended and they've been trapped wherever and they don't know how to readjust to the common world. In this case, I think it's more like it revolves around the abandonment issues that come up twice and the relationship to the child. So even if it is like something that's been common, I really do like the fact that it's sort of playing off of itself even within this particular section.
Right.
That there's and I guess maybe to frame that, let me just try and recap really quickly. We're talking, so in this part, there's like a few different things that go on. One is that there's a main narrator, Georgi Gospodinov, essentially, using the name Georgi Gospodinov, who can enter into like other people in his family's memories and see like things that had happened to them. And he's talking with his grandfather, and there's a few different stories of his grandfather that it was memories he inhabits. Like one is when they're at a fair and a festival with the Minotaur, which we'll get to later. Another section in which his grandfather is left behind. Like they go to this flour mill, I believe, and he has like 7 brothers and sisters. Everyone gets in the cart, they all leave, and they realize after they've gone a number of miles that they left him behind, this 3-year-old boy. And that's a great section, I think, because like the mom's like, yeah, I was gonna say, you must really, the section where like the mom only paused for a second and thought, it could just go on. It's like a moment of like the worst sort of parenting, but also that's, yeah, I wouldn't say that that's uncommon among some people. No, I would never leave my kids behind, but nevertheless, like you get that. And then the grandfather also has the story of where when he fought in the war in Hungary, he stayed with this woman in her basement. Or probably, I guess this is partially invented, during the war. And there's like different stories as to why he ended up staying there and for how long. But like he comes back, and before he dies, he gives his son, or he gives Georgi this paper that has like a hand drawn on it, like a baby's hand. And so it's like this whole implicated story of like maybe this kid in Hungary is actually his grandfather's son.
No, that piece of paper came in the mail because there's a reference to the wife just casually ignoring what it was.
Right, but then he gives it to Georgi when he dies.
Yes,
he hands it to him at that point. So that's how he ends up. That's how Georgi ends up with the paper. So there's that idea. Someone online did point out that the basement's another iteration of the labyrinth, which does seem true too.
Right,
and
it's very obvious, right, that that's what he's establishing, right? And I do think it's worth. You said something in there that I think, like, just sort of casually as part of this plot, like the supernatural element of this is that, yes, he has the capability. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, if he's in someone's presence, like physical, like within a few feet or whatever, he can enter into their memories.
Right. That's what at least in this section, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Right. And so that's an important thing. And then, you know, he spends some time sort of establishing it here, as you need to do with these sorts of things. He does it well. He jumps around. He goes from great-grandfather.
This is grandfather, I believe.
And then it's like, so it would be his great aunt. Is that the term? His grandfather's sister, right? And then there's like the slug as well, because the father eats the grandfather is eating a slug as some sort of whatever folksy medicinal remedy, I suppose. And so you get the slug's memory of being swallowed by a human being or whatever. So he sets it up pretty nicely, the way that he's able to jump around from people's narratives and memories, and he talks about the disparity between his grandfather not telling him something, like the thing about the Minotaur, and him being able to go in and see the memory for himself and sort of understanding that there's a disparity. But he doesn't reveal it, obviously, to his grandfather, that he knows that there's a disparity. So there's a whole lot going on there, and it speaks to the idea of like the hidden secret, right? Much like the Minotaur being tucked away in the labyrinth, that sort of thing, which is what makes it such a useful metaphor for this.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem too like it is kind of like the labyrinth of memory and of like their whole family history too. And in some levels, like this part of this like really does appeal, I think, to people who are looking for something that's more of like a family saga or a European sort of family story, because it is getting into those different corridors. Oh, which is also worth pointing out that every section, there's a lot of little sections that have titles. There's multiple ones in here that are side corridors that are like leading off into the labyrinth aspects of this too. Which, what are your thoughts, Brian? Oh, sorry.
I was just looking at the epigraphy, and it's kind of interesting. Obviously, it talks about myth in the epigraphy. There is no childhood and death, or there's only childhood and death, and nothing in between, and everything is the elderly or a child. It seems like, right? Mm-hmm. The world is no longer magical. You have been abandoned. I've already set up. There's clearly abandonment going on in here, and then just the whole thing about what's true and not true and doesn't matter, or just the last one. If you prefer, just read this as fiction.
Which doesn't this seem a lot like the invented part in that regard?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of playing. It's very playful. This feels a little more serious.
I mean, in terms of just the epigraphs, because there's like 20 of those in that book too.
Yeah. Oh well, yeah, sure, certainly.
I have to be honest. After a while, I'm just like, okay, I don't care.
I know.
You guys do know that
you got a Borges quote. Ooh,
So one of the people in here isn't real.
Really?
Yeah. It's in the Gostine's in here multiple times. There's only childhood and death and nothing in between Gostine's selected autobiographies. And then purebred genres don't interest me much. The novel is no Aryan. Gostine novel and nothingness. I don't think that's real.
Let me see.
I probably glossed right over it.
I don't think there's any reason that you would necessarily know, and I probably would have too. But the student who's writing the pieces about this is like, I can't find any record of this person. Who are they? Where did this come from? And it's like, oh, I think that's a character in the book. So it's like another little hint. Or I think that's kind of where this is a little bit more interesting than just a bunch of random quotes. I mean, it does set a sort of tempo or tone.
What is interesting? I had a longer, I don't know, maybe close to being a novella, where there's tons of Bible footnotes throughout the piece, and like 5 or 6 of them aren't even real books of the Bible, but you just throw stuff in and people don't even pay attention. Whereas so it could be something like that. We're just having fun. And
I don't think we ever mentioned this on this podcast, but we invented for a Greek book that we published once, tying into myth, I suppose. Invented a couple blurbs. Because there's no blurbs, so I invented a character who blurbed a bunch of Greek books, who always wrote titles like, it was like Adonis and the Atlanteans, and like terrible jokes. They were like swimming towards Atlantis. That was one of them. Swimming towards Atlantis, and then something else with Adonis and something. And he would blurb these books, and like no one ever questioned it because like no one reads that carefully or cares. I think it's like Papadopoulos is the last name because I thought that was like reminded me of Webster.
Isn't that a guy that was a running back for UCLA and now he's on Fox Sports? Something Alex Papadopoulos, I think, is an actual person.
Is that what he did? I thought he was just a talking head.
Maybe
an actual athlete.
Oh man,
he let himself go like most do.
So with the Minotaur, in the Minotaur section in the story, like the Georgi goes into his grandfather's memories, reminds him being at this fair, this carnival, and having like a certain amount of money, fiver, seems a little bit out of place maybe, but and he's debating whether he should like get a drink or buy these candies or go see like the snake or whatever. And he has this like trick, this magician sorcerer puts a hole in his hat or whatever, and And in the memories that Georgi sees, he goes in to see the Minotaur who's sitting there, and they tell this whole story about the Minotaur being like sad or being abandoned because he was like abandoned by his family, but also like he couldn't hang with the cows because the cows didn't want him. And so he ended up being part of this circus where they just bring him around and he's very sad and all that kind of stuff. We've got all the cats are circling. I can feel them. Like,
well, mine is on the table as well. So,
but so he sees the Minotaur, and I guess what's worth maybe talking about, especially you, Tom, since you said you're way into it, is just the Minotaur story as a whole. Like my understanding of it is from Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the movie, and like the Minotaur runs into a tree, and then Percy Jackson rips its horn off and stabs it and kills it, and that's pretty much the story as I understand it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean,
nailed it.
Nailed it.
Cool.
Okay, so Chad, this is I'm gonna butcher exactly what she said because, as you know, she probably went on for a long time describing it. But you asked Kaya last week to describe the plot of the book, which I tried to make sense of as I was listening. And I was like, okay, sure. And then at a certain point, I was like, okay, I don't know what she's talking about anymore. But to me, also, I should say that I'm trying to write a blurb for the consortium anniversary sort of display, whatever it is you're doing for getting the books out there. And I was trying to say it exactly, very succinctly, but a version of what she was saying. My understanding of like the real essence of the Minotaur myth is, in relation to this book, is that the Minotaur is at the center of this incredibly dark labyrinth, and no one really wants him out except for one person. But it turns out that everyone sort of wants him out. Like it's good for everybody if he's out and no longer a closed secret, right? But that's never really discussed until it's at hand. And that's sort of what's going on with like memory of tragedy and loss at the center of this book, and I would argue at the larger history of Eastern Europe. I mean, you could argue more for the rest of Europe as well, but especially the countries that became communist after World War II. The history of those countries that were, one, forced to deny their own history, renounce their religion, deny that they had witnessed any atrocities, been part of any atrocities, any of that sort of thing. And so as the narrator and the author, I suppose, at the same time, are trying to get closer and closer to the truth, there's no direct line. So you have to go in the circle, right? And the risk is, well, how do you get out once you find that truth? Like, do you allow yourself to become burdened down by the truth and by the history, or do you get stuck there in the middle, or do you find your way back out to the contemporary day? And I think that's like a huge problem. Maybe not quite so much now, but like 20 years ago or whatever in Europe was like, how do you get out of this fucking, the weight of history, right? Like so many books from those places are that, right? I mean, Krishnahorkai wrote a lot of books about this kind of thing. A lot of Americans have written about this sort of thing, like DeLillo, it's like his big obsession, like the weight of history. I'm rambling here, but the point is, like, I think the way to describe the book is a labyrinthine sort of approach, an attempt to get at personal and national and European history and survive it and get back in.
I can see that, and especially the Minotaur can kind of stand for a bit of shame too, because there's that playing off of like where the Minotaur. So like I know the Percy Jackson thing, which I did not know about until today when I was Googling stuff. I mean, the real story was that there's the shame of like well, I don't even know what you say. Like it's sacrilege and shame. So like Poseidon gives King Minos a bull, and then he's supposed to sacrifice that bull, and he doesn't. He tries to trick the gods, and so the gods are like, well, now your wife wants to have sex with the bull, and does through elaborate means. There's a whole subsection of this myth in which like Icarus and Daedalus make a fake bull for her to hide inside of, so that the bull can have sex with her. Like it's like a wooden bull, like it's like almost like a Trojan horse sort of analog. But anyways, so then she gives birth to a Minotaur. It's neither beast nor man, whatever, which is a bit of like the shame and there's a lot that you could unpack there too.
I mean, to me, it's always been like a double-edged thing. It's like, well, why was the Minotaur sent away? Is it his shame that his wife slept with the bull and that was their child? Or is it his shame at having defied the gods?
I think it's that. I think, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, exactly. It could be both. But I think he also gets sent away because he can't, the myth is that he can't eat anything. Like he can't nurse in a normal way. And he wants to eat things because he's a monster. So they put him in the labyrinth, but yet, whatever, it's fucking myth. And so like they send over, like, because of like another array of stories, Athens has to send over a bunch of virgins and every X number of years to die in the labyrinth. So they go into the labyrinth, they get lost, the Minotaur eats them, and that's that. But
Well,
then,
it's
like,
a well-known fact that Athenians are very tender.
They're super soft. They're succulent.
Much more succulent than Aegeans or Spartans or Cretans, for that matter. So you really want to, if you're going to eat somebody, eat an Athenian baby. They're delicious. They're smart. They're succulent. It's a tasty treat. It's worth eating if you're a Minotaur.
It's like the veal of Greek.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And now I'm hungry.
Yeah.
But then, like,
but only 7. You eat 8, too much. It's got to be the right portion.
Yeah, very, very good point.
Yeah.
But then, like, so then they escape, or like, who is it that goes in there? Theseus? Is that right?
Yeah, yes.
That kills the Minotaur and escapes. But like he escapes because he just ties up a string and walks through the labyrinth. Like that seems like the most unoriginal plan of escape. Like no,
he talks about how the daughter helps him.
Sister, the Minotaur's sister, Ariadne.
Sister, yeah.
Ariadne gives him the string.
She's a traitor.
It's her idea.
Yeah.
Which, again, to Chad's point, like someone needed to have that idea. That's the myth is based on this.
But I thought the whole point of it was that you're gonna, no matter what you do, even if you do something really cool like kill a monster, you're gonna end up just disappointing your father, and he's gonna kill himself anyways. That's what I learned.
How they all end. Pretty much.
This book is filled with good parenting.
You forget one thing, and your dad jumps into the ocean and dies. Greek.
I think we've totally nailed this myth.
Yeah, I think we got it.
That's the thing. Like I've said this many times. Like my memory is pretty shitty because I read a lot of books. I remember visual scenes and sequences from this, but I can't remember how it all fits together.
It's like
Harry
Hamlin. Is that the guy that did the Argonauts with the? That's all I remember.
Oh God, what's the name of that movie?
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans. Yeah. Yes. God, that movie with Robert Parrish. Yeah. Or the guy who looked a lot like Robert Parrish.
I think for me, when this really started coming together, and like I was a little, there's not any really footing starting out. I mean, you're just kind of like playing along, like, okay, so we're jumping from time to time to time. I'm not really sure what's what. That's fine. But when he starts getting into that section of his childhood, and they're in the basement, and you're feeling the oppression of communism and what's allowed and not allowed, and then he starts getting the books, and we feel like Minotaurs running into it. Like, to me, that's when it started. Like, okay, I've got the key, I think, a little bit to understand where we're going with this.
I agree. I think it's very important that he does bring it all the way to the present, or something resembling contemporary times, instead of staying too far back in a different realm. Like when he starts talking about, like, in the 80s, and the slang sort of, it's minor, but you can tell that it's more contemporary slang. Am I imagining that they talk about like Atari at some point or something? I can't remember. There's something like they do in the basement of the house, but then there's that whole thing about like, God doesn't exist, right? So it's like this weird.
That part was really interesting with the G. Yes. You mean government? You can do government starts with G, but not God.
Yeah.
Right. Whoa. Okay. We're just deleting words out of our existence now. Okay.
Wholesale. Cool. Yes.
I mean, that's what I've been reading. Another Bulgarian book, Wolf Hunt, by Ivalo Petrov. I think that's the last name. Anyways, they're using my class. I just finished it. It's a giant ass book, but a lot of it is set during like the World War II times, where Bulgaria went through like the fascist government for so long and then became communist, and that sort of change of like how you think and what you can say and what you can do and who you are and all those problems. And this sort of hints at it. It's not nearly as like into it as that book is, but it does that part, like you can't say God in a communist school. Like that's a very real thing.
Yeah, I mean, I always forget. In my mind, like an oppressive government regime and religion sort of go hand in hand. So, like, why wouldn't they use the church to sort of further oppress their people? But you know, then you remember like the Power and the Glory was about the hunt down for the last. I guess they didn't really like Catholicism because the Catholics tried to control their people, you know, transnationally from the Vatican, right? Like they were worried about people listening to the Pope and not listening to the whatever supreme leader instead. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yes, communism is bad. What was I going to say? Oh, what the father character I thought was also the second read when the father talks about like when the father sort of chides him for saying God and whatever. He doesn't say like don't believe in God or don't say it. He's just like don't listen to your teachers. Like, don't listen to the government. Don't listen to your teachers. In my head, he was much more militant about it, like trying to encourage his son to become a sort of revolutionary. And now reading again, it's like, oh no, I totally put that on there myself. Like that was not there. He was just kind of an asshole dad. Like he was like, just don't make any trouble, basically.
Yeah.
He didn't really give
Jesus, like you can get just destroyed under communism for causing that sort of trouble. Right. The other God thing that I really liked though was when he was talking about the ants and like playing God with the ants and like drawing the ring and that they won't move around the hand and what it would be like if a hand came down on you. And that part at the end of that section where it says like the revelation that the ant God gave me in the moment of awakening without opening its jaws went more or less like this. God is an insect who watches us. Only small things can be everywhere. Which I thought was pretty cool. A sort of view of his.
Flips the whole like God, like, you know, I forget what they have different terms for these various versions of God that people believe in, right? Like the clockmaker versus whatever. So this hands-on version is always like with the Greek gods, you know, they're up in Olympus, sitting on the clouds, sort of throwing lightning bolts down or whatever. That's like the traditional version, and instead you get these, you know, million ants or whatever that look up from below. Which I know, Chad, you're now thinking of the Million Ant Man or whatever the fuck that was on Rick and Morty. Do you remember this? Where they did this group of Guardians.
Yes. This is another. We've got a good Rick and Morty reference.
Should have one every week.
There was a time where I feel like we had a run of them in this. Like the Rick and Morty influence to the 2-month review. Someone is asking a question that I think is worth mentioning here. So they're asking about whether or not you think any other metaphor, Georgi could have used any other metaphor to write this, or is Minotaur really the metaphor that works for the book, or the easy choice?
I mean, I'm somewhere in between the first and third option there, which is it's kind of the easy one because it's there. It's a myth that people. It's very easy to retell, right? Like the part where it's retold there by the circus barker or whatever is pretty. Like, look, if it's a freak show attraction, it's pretty easy to retell. Odyssey is not going to work. Any of the war ones are not going to work, right? I mean, this is the one where like it's the secret at the middle. I don't know. I think it is the one that makes the most sense, but it is also an approachable one.
I also think it maps really well on the idea of novel making and of creation. I mean, there's that whole, this is not really related, but maybe not unrelated, is the Olympian idea that that a writer is like the rat inside the labyrinth that they built. And like that idea of like finding your way out of it is part of what you're constructing as a writer. Although, I don't know, Brian, that's more to your field, your view.
When I was looking at this and I was trying to figure out what made him write it or how, I wonder if he heard this story about this guy that was in the basement and he thought of his own childhood of being in the basement. And so you start thinking about subterranean, and then he's into myths, and a subterranean myth would be the labyrinth or whatever. And so that was what, like, I'm gonna roll with that. I'm wondering if that's kind of how it started constructing and then circling out of that. And then obviously, as Tom was saying, I mean, it fits really nicely to, like, there is no easy answer. There's no good guy and bad guy, right? Is the Minotaur bad? Sure.
It's usually treated as bad. Percy Jackson treats him as bad.
But he's not. And he's not, right? Like, I don't want to be down here. I don't like eating people. You don't feed me. It's dark. It sucks. What do you want me to do? Like,
yeah, what else am I going to eat? You're only giving me Athenians.
Right.
They're so succulent.
No other choice.
I mean, to me,
I would like a little roughage with my Athenians.
I always treat anything that's caged against its will with sympathy, but that's just,
Exactly, yeah.
you know, so I mean, I think you're meant to. I think I don't know who wrote these particular myths down on paper for the first time, which of the writers, but like this one seems like you are meant to have sympathy for the beast who exists through no fault of his own and is being punished through no fault of his own, right? Mm-hmm. Because of human folly, basically.
There's it is a good stand-in again for like Eastern European experience through the 20th century of like some of this is beyond their control, especially Bulgaria, countries like that. Poland, I think of as in a similar light, where they're just in that middle strip between two warring ideologies.
Fucking geography.
Over and back and forth, yeah. And like there's nothing, like there's a great bit that Bill Johnson, who translates a lot of great Polish books, talked to my class a few years ago about something, and he had mentioned Stone Upon Stone, and he had mentioned that there's this idea that in that book or in a lot of Polish books that war passes through your town, that like wars will pass through, and like that idea is really hard for Americans to really grasp because we don't have that experience recently in which wars just pass through your town and then pass back through your town, and that you're staying there and like there's fighting going on through you and around you, and people are being barracked inside your houses or whatever, and it's one army and then it's the other army, and then but things are just going on, and that's a complicated emotion for a lot of people in that part of the world to continue working through. And that does seem to be kind of the case. It works fairly well with this idea of the Minotaur as the main sort of metaphor, and within this book a little bit.
It's funny, that idea of like recent history. There's never been a war fought on American soil since we've become America. Like,
yeah, well, I was thinking of the Civil War as being the other option.
I mean, yeah, I suppose that's true, but like, again, that's a long time. Like, I think all Civil War veterans have been dead for what? Do the math, 50 years. Like, it's just not. Yeah, it's way out of everyone's memory. And even World War II veterans are now who experienced this passing through sort of thing are dying off by the thousand every day, I'm sure. It's funny the way it gets treated in movies, because it is often like war movies, like World War II movies. Every movie has that scene where like you pass through a village, you're treated as conquering heroes for a night of revelry, and then you move on, right? And there's no thought to like what were these people's lives like before the American forces showed up to liberate them from the German forces, right? It's just, oh, you're here, yay, and then they move on. Like, these people were occupied for years and years and years, And there's been some good books about that sort of thing, but they're all so hyper-focused on that experience, right? You don't get this larger sort of exploration of the greater thing.
Yeah, that's very true.
Which, to be fair, it's very hard to encompass all of that, like
yeah.
Without it being just a massive sort of book. Two, without it, you kind of need it to be experimental, and obviously not everybody can sort of pull that off. So,
very true. And I think this changes a lot as it goes along too. I mean, there's like the same sort of structure idea, the grand idea, and yeah, it's going to keep evolving in different ways. Like when you're saying, Brian, about like how he had this idea, heard the story, and like put those together. This section, a lot of these sections read as if they're one standalone, almost like not stories are wrong, because they do have like, they're more tonal or symphonic in some way. Like they have the different beats and the different movements that are going through there, but they do sort of like this reads as one piece. Like you could read this alone and think that it's sort of satisfying, I think.
Yeah, I'm just curious if page 57, if this was true or not for him. It says, "We bang around like minotaurs in these basements." That was the line, and immediately entered my as of yet unassembled catalog of epiphanies, all of those revelations, blah, 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 blah. But like, I'm wondering if that was a real line that his dad said, and like, all right, I'm going to take that and see what I can build around that.
Yeah.
That seems like a weird thing for a father to say.
But it does seem very weird. I agree.
What if you two might say that to your children? But for his father to have said it seems really weird.
Sure.
Our children learn all sorts of things.
Like if I had my hypothetical children and they were roughhousing or whatever. I don't know that I would use the word, minotaurs to describe their actions.
We generally play a lot of games in which we yell Ragnarok really loud. That's usually our go-to.
Is that the bad guy in Thor?
It's not a bad guy. It's the end of worlds. It's like existent.
Mind you, I've never seen these Thor movies. This is all a mystery to me.
Chad exits the bathroom and sprays some Glade. Ragnarok, you guys, don't go in there. Okay, Dad, thanks.
It was literally the Ragnarok experience that shattered an end table this past weekend. So
I saw that. That was a cheap ass end table. So there's cardboard inside of your wood. So there you go.
I have no idea. Whatever, $14 Target end table. Thank you for lasting for a year.
I don't think that was Asheville, Carolina craftsmanship there, buddy.
No, that was a post-divorce purchase. That's what you get. You get what's there.
See this, son? This is the sadness of divorce. Look inside this end table. See the cardboard in there? That's empty. And that's the way I feel inside too. I have the hard shell outside, but the inside is all empty, and I'm fragile, and I'll break. There could have been a really good coaching lesson there.
Real teachable moment, I think, is what they said.
Yeah. And it was like, Aiden, could you go get me a Band-Aid because my leg is bleeding everywhere? Yeah. So, anyways,
I had a weird sensation with this first 50 pages. I started off like really enjoying it, and then I got a little bogged down, and by the end, I'm on board. I really enjoy the writing, and I'm digging it.
Yeah, I will say, Chad, I would take issue, and again, this is like me having read the book and now rereading part of it. I would not say that if I read just this part, I would feel satisfied.
Okay.
I don't think it's quite, there's not enough there to feel really satisfied so far. I feel like he does a lot of world building and establishing, and nothing is even close to sort of having delivered on its promise yet.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I was thinking
stories are really charming. The individual little, the snippets of stories that we've gotten so far are charming. Don't get me wrong. It's just I know that there are other things coming, so it doesn't feel satisfying.
That's true.
So pretending it's your first read, would you feel like you're in good hands? Do you trust the author?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we haven't talked a lot, Brian and I, about like what our tastes are. This is my kind of book. I really like fragmented sort of things and jumping all over the place. Not just like as a trope. It's just I end up falling for these things.
Yeah.
A lot. Chad, it's funny. I was to get us way off base here, but I just started reading last week. I'm about halfway through. Empty Set.
I already read that. Yeah.
Oh my God, so good.
I like it. I don't love it. I like the first 60 pages more than I like the last half of it.
Well, we'll see. I'm at about 90 pages. I think it's only like 200 pages long. So
what's funny is that article I wrote about it was basically just describing you as being one of the core people that would read it.
I mean, it's true. I'm a sucker for that sort of fragmented, artistic inclined sort of books. It's like, look, Thomas Pynchon has only written so many books. I've got to get that fixed somewhere, But
there's like, and it's books like this too that follow that same kind of format of like of being challenging in a way because you have to piece things together and like asking, respecting the reader in a sense that they can figure things out and that they can work their way through these references. They don't have to be completely linear. Nothing has to be spelled out bit A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You can do things in a different order, and that people are going to come along with you. And that is a very gratifying experience to read books like that for a certain select group of readers. And that part of readers, like these books really hit. Like Empty Set does it as well. But like, and there again, I had some others in my mind a minute ago, but I can't think of them right now. But there are a number of books that kind of do that. And once you start doing that, if you're doing it well enough, that there's like this certain bit of people that are going to gravitate towards that and really appreciate it. And this book really does tap into that because it has the myth, the history, the fragmentation. Like each of those little things kind of builds into like being this sort of book for a very nice set of readers. That it's very, very satisfying to have that experience, I think.
I mean, what the key thing to all of these kinds of books is there's a certain writing style that works for this kind of thing, that needs to be self-contained within those fragments. There needs to be, these are people who need to know how to tell succinct stories that aren't dumbed down, but that are sort of instantly satisfying. I'm impatient, is what it comes down to. I like having something digestible, like every day. Like, as much as I love Crash and Horkai, like, man, that's work. Like, even the short stuff that's work. You know, that's like, you pick up where you left off and you're like, well, fuck, which word did I leave off on? Because there's just an endless sentence here, you know? And it's not that it's not good, it's just I'm aware that I'm working as I'm reading, as opposed to enjoying it at the same time. Like,
where are you on this kind of? Where are you on this kind of thing, Brian?
Yeah, I was trying to get to, like, Brian, what do you think? How do you think style plays into this sort of broader format of storytelling?
I do like it when it's more controlled and contained, for sure. Because if the format's going to be all ridiculous and crazy, the actual line level better be really tight to kind of counter that. And if it's going to be a really strict, rigorous format, I don't mind there being a little bit of stretching in the language, but one or the other. And I think he does a good job of being very economical in his storytelling, I think, which is very helpful. But if it's good, I like it, basically. It's kind of lame, right? Like, what kind of music do you like? I like all music as long as it's good. Like, it's that dumb snob answer, I guess, right?
I mean, there are good examples of every type of book, maybe.
Sure, but I mean, you can't. As I love saying this because it's very frustrating when people come into the bookstore and they're like, recommend a good book. And I'm like, fuck, how?
Yeah.
I don't know you, but like, there's no accounting for taste, right? This is the thing. Like, no matter how much I might want, and this is a bad example, I might want to enjoy Jonathan Franzen's writing, I'm never going to enjoy Jonathan Franzen's writing. Right? Like, there's something aesthetically offensive to me about the way he writes.
You could argue that there's an aesthetic that he exists within that is better done by someone else.
Sure, I'm sure that is the case. But for me, that is never going to be the book I'm going to run to buy, right? And that's the thing. It's like, you can tell me something is great a million times. It doesn't mean I'm personally am going to like it, you know. And that's like, there are people who love David Foster Wallace and people who hate him, you know, and people who love DeLillo and people who hate him. Like, all these, there are a million different ways people approach things for various different reasons, and you can't, you know, you can't always hit the nail on the head with everybody.
It's like, it's like Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins do the same thing, but Peter Gabriel is the right answer and Phil Collins is the wrong answer. When you ask somebody, like, who do you like between these two, right? And it's just a preference of, it's just your personal preference, and
right. Yeah.
But there is a right and a wrong answer. And if someone's like, "Oh, Phil Collins is the shit," you're like, "Well, we're not going to be friends for long, so let's drink while we can, huh?"
Who out there is a Phil Collins fan? I mean, I assume there are Phil Collins fans.
I don't know, idiots that only know the drum part.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, right. Phil Collins is a great drummer.
Yeah. The drum part's incredible.
Oh, man. Well, I guess I don't have anything else to add to this part except for, like, maybe our favorite lines. But I do want to say that the next section is all of 14 pages. And for anyone watching this, we're going to be talking about this one not next Monday, but next Sunday, because Caitlin Baker from University Bookstore in Seattle will be joining us. And she works on Mondays, but she doesn't work on Sundays. So you can do it Sunday night for everyone to join back in. And it's a very short section. So we'll see how that advances things. But in the meantime, do you guys have a favorite line from this part?
I was totally not thinking of this stuff as I was reading, and something that on this reading I remember standing out to me, but that didn't stand out the first time, was on page 51, talking about the names, and I would learn names, learn the alphabet at the cemetery and all that. What happened to the names after the owners died? Were they set free? Did the names continue to mean something, or did they disintegrate like bodies beneath them, leaving only the bones of consonants? And, you know, that's a very flowery sort of description of language and blah, 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 and like the idea of names and all that. But it is still sort of, it's interesting, right? Like this, well, is this before or after the discussion of like Plato's, you know, idea that like names, that there is inherently a proper name for everything on the earth, right? Like this thing is called the elephant because it's an elephant, right? And that I think this is in reference to the grandmother being upset about the Hungarian word for bread or something like that, right? And so that all seems like very hokey, and then you get this beautiful little sentence about like, what happens to your name? You know, like even though of course like everyone's name, there are, you know, dozens of each of our names out there in just this, you know, country. So it's just weird to think that they do personally belong to us, and then we die, and then that's it, right? Because most of us are never going to be famous authors or whatever, and live on in history. It's just poof, gone. I don't know.
Yeah, man, Jesus, way to bring it down.
Sorry.
I'm glad I haven't some more wine here, so I'm good. I'll live. Brian, do you have one?
I'll do two really short ones, maybe.
Okay.
No, I'll just do one. How about just do one? Page 14 and 15, when he's talking about the weird, the carnival Minotaur thing. There's this one line that says, when describing him, and yet he is more human than anything else. There is sorrow in him which no animal possesses. And again, like it comes back later. I just like the idea of this monster and kind of subverting the idea of that, like it's a sad human that's down there. It's not a monster. So I'm gonna kind of keep that in the back of my mind as I'm reading through all of the physics of sorrow.
Have either of you read the book The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break?
No,
of course
we used to
not.
sell it at the bookstore, I believe, way back when, but I've never read that.
It's about a Minotaur is like a short order cook in like the Carolinas or something like that.
Yep.
And the idea is basically that he's been around, like he's immortal. The Minotaur has just been walking the earth for all these years. And what is his banal life like in the 20th century?
Isn't there a sequel to that too?
Yeah, it just got published last year. It's by like some very small publisher. I cannot remember what it's called, but I was trying to track a copy down, and they printed like, I don't know, 300 copies or something. So
that's weird, because I thought that book was like a biggish deal.
It was. It's just I think the sequel came, you know, a full decade after the original, and it, you know, it's not like he's J.D. Salinger or anything. So
fair enough.
It wasn't that big a deal.
I had one other short line. I'm not even going to read the full sentence. My favorite one was the one about the ant gods. But in that same section, the other line that I like is, "I dreamed that I was awake," which I never. She points out, and I never really thought about that. That is really exactly how every dream description should start.
Yes. It reminds me that this is getting really cliche. Reminds me that there's a Tom Waits line where he says, "I dreamed that I was dreaming of you."
You know, someone pointed out your Tom Waits hat on the chat and said that they very much appreciated it.
Tom Waits hat, huh?
Oh, and the other one that I like, Chad, is live, laugh, love. You should have that in your house somewhere. Okay, we need to do those things.
Just put it on like a little inspiring speech. I need to see that every day. You know, actually, I think that there's a sign at the university that has that on it, and it's for like in the tunnel that I passed through for some yoga thing that's going on every Wellness Wednesday or something like that.
Yep,
So,
light it on fire. In fact, I was gonna after watching National Treasure, I was gonna take a lighter to this part to see if the hidden message of. But I didn't want to burn this fabulous first edition, so I was nervous to do that.
I actually wrote those in invisible ink in every single one, every single.
Okay. So they all say boo. WBS. Is that what it's yeah.
Yeah. Well.
Great, Chad. Very, very mature.
So, anyways, thanks you guys for doing this. And next week we'll be doing the next section. It's pages 59 through 72. If you don't have a copy of the book, you can buy it at stores like Riffraff or any independent store in your area. You can get it online. If you need to get it from us, you can use the code 2 month, and you'll get 20% off at checkout from our website. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to send them in. Follow us on Twitter. Tom, what's you're the Tom Roberge?
That is correct. Which is, in case anyone was wondering, a riff on Ohio State University. So my alma mater.
I can't imagine anyone doesn't know that though. But
Chad, most book world does not know anything about sports. Like they're willfully ignorant about sports. So
to be fair, Ohio State doesn't know much about sports either.
Oh man,
I'm kidding.
And then Riffraff,
you go to like Evergreen or something.
No, San Diego State. I just went to like Sexual Assault University. So clearly they don't know anything about they don't know anything about sports at San Diego State. The dumb bros drinking.
What's Riffraff's Twitter though? It's Riffraff PVD.
Yes, PVD. Riffraff PVD. Yep.
And if you're in the area, go visit them. Brian, you're at Brian Wood _
Yeah, at Brian Wood _. Apparently Brian Wood's a really famous comic book artist, but I'm taking a lot of his followers, so it's cool. Keep it up.
You should just every once in a while drop in some like reference to like DMZ and you'll be good.
Yep, I wrote demo and all that shit. I'm in it. You can see me at the next Comic-Con coming to you.
Wait, this reminds me of when I was at New Directions and getting them on Twitter back in, whatever this was, 2010? God. And so like started the New Directions Twitter account, and we kept getting these followers who were very clearly fans of New Direction, I think is what they were called. The actual Glee club on Glee is called New Direction.
Sweet.
Most New Directions that you find if you just Google it are all like rehab centers.
Yes, there was one actually down the street from my apartment in Brooklyn that I would go from New Directions, get off the subway, and walk by a New Directions.
Oh, God. And for anyone who's listening, you can always join the Goodreads group and you can leave comments there. You can do anything you want and join back in next week to see more. Also, rate us on iTunes and listen to the 3% podcast as well, which we'll do again soon.
Hey, I missed the first episode. What song are you doing at the beginning of this?
Oh, shit. The song is called Something, which I can't remember at the moment, but it's by Angela Rodell, who translated the book.
Translator? Huh. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, cool. I was hoping we were going to do Bulls on Parade, but whatever. Okay.
I thought I'd give her a shout out. A little bit of love. Download her song through. There's a link. I don't have this in front of me, so I can't remember the title of it. But there's a link to her not SoundCloud, what's the other one? Bandcamp, where you can buy the songs on there. So you guys can find it there. But yeah, so it's Angela's song.
Is she going to be on this season? Is Angela going to be on this season?
She is, but we have to talk about that because she's in Bulgaria, and so it is approximately like 5 a.m. in the morning there right now. So
hey, it's good to wake up early. That's good for you. So
she said she would come on at 5, and I was like, cool. I don't want to do that. Like,
I look forward to meeting her. This would be a tough one to translate, I bet.
Oh God, yeah, she's done a lot of stuff.
How many O's do you want to put on the moo or the? That's a hard choice to make. 6, 7. Oh.
Yeah, usually 7. 7's a good number, just like the number of Athenians you want to eat.
Succulent.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to stop broadcasting this now. We'll talk to you all soon.